Bitcoin can take as long as it needs to take. Bitcoin doesn't operate on my time. Part of, in my opinion, the journey of becoming a Bitcoiner is a sense of ego death. It's not about me. It's not about the risks that I've signed up for in my life. 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 3 months. Yeah, I think that the currency has to get lower. Hopefully this podcast has made that abundantly clear. I think the dollar's got to go down, which means Bitcoin's got to go up. I think it will start performing when they start adding more liquidity. Bitcoin will tell you exactly when they start printing a lot of money to solve for this liquidity crisis. By the way, Bitcoin going down is very simple. Someone out there needs to raise cash, whether that's to buy a house, whether that's because they got liquidated, whether that's because they need to fund the SpaceX IPO.
Jack Mallers, CEO of Strike, claims that as governments grapple with enormous debt and depreciating currencies, the global financial system is on the verge of collapse. According to him, central banks' only remaining option is to print more money, which gradually lowers the purchasing value of fiat currencies. According to Mallers, Bitcoin was created for just this kind of setting. He anticipates that Bitcoin will become the preferred store of value as more money enters the system, and trust in conventional currencies wanes, with a road toward a $500,000 price becoming more plausible. If you're intrigued by bold predictions and deep financial insights, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more engaging content. Thank you for your support and enjoy the video.
Nothing stops the train. Like I said earlier, somebody has to lose. Say that again. There is a loss. Someone has to realize the loss. So I'm a realist, authentic, truly myself. There's no hype story I got. Now, with that being said, I think Bitcoin will play an important part. I've got an exciting story for Bitcoiners. I'll actually use the gold market as a way to articulate this. So China is, ultimately what the United States is trying to solve is they want balanced trade. You're hearing Trump say this. We need to reduce our deficit, balance out the trade. China ran a record trade surplus in the last fiscal year. They ran a $1 trillion trade surplus. And when China runs a $1 trillion trade surplus, they basically think of it like they get a bunch of US store credits. You don't take that surplus and invest it into your own, you don't want to strengthen your own currency, which weakens your own export market. So you get a bunch of dollars, which are US store credits. And what can I get with these store credits? Where I can get US treasuries, I can get real estate, I can get equities, like I could buy NVIDIA and stuff. And so what you see is an artificially strong currency, because it's the world reserve currency, and artificially strong assets, because you are seeing like the world's surplus recycled back into the United States, which is kind of the whole point. You have these like twin deficits. Anyways, China has started to, and this is after the 2008, this isn't anything new, taking these store credits and buying gold and importing physical gold, because they're saying the IOU, the bonds, we don't trust it anymore. After the sanctioning of Russia, or after just the pure devaluation and bailout in 2008, like we're less willing to enter the US store and like just spend on lending to you guys. Sure, we'll buy a little bit of NVIDIA stock and stuff like that. But they started importing a lot of gold. If the amount of gold they imported last year, if gold was at $20,000 an ounce instead of what it's at now, which is like $4,000 an ounce, balanced trade, because all of the money that they made in the surplus would have had to go towards allocating more expensive gold. Does that make sense? Because the reason that that's important is it's a really fancy way of saying dollar devaluation. What's the difference? Gold went from $4,000 an ounce to $20,000 an ounce. The dollar went down a lot. Same thing. What's the meme? What's the difference? Same thing. And so what I think one way that the United States can get out of this is devalue the currency against hard assets. So if I'm the United States, let's go audit Fort Knox, see how much is in there. Let's get a lot of Bitcoin and let's reprice these things. Let gold go to $20,000 an ounce, reprice it on our balance sheet. Boom, problem solved. Like, here's another way to say it. I can solve the United States problems in 10 seconds. Don't be the world reserve currency. The world reserve currency means your job is to export the thing that everyone has perpetual demand for. You have to run deficits. There's no such thing as running a surplus as the world reserve currency, at least sustainably. You got to run deficits. So if you want to solve your problem, you don't want an artificially strong currency. You need the currency to weaken. You need your asset prices to be repriced, against hard money. Don't be the world reserve currency. Now, that's not politically favorable. Yeah, but I'm bullish with no pressure.
Go into that. What do you mean by that?
I'm bullish with Bitcoin can take as long as it needs to take. Bitcoin doesn't operate on my time. Part of, in my opinion, the journey of becoming a Bitcoiner is a sense of ego death. It's not about me. It's not about the risks that I've signed up for in my life. 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 3 months. Yeah, I think that the currency has to get lower. Hopefully this podcast has made that abundantly clear. I think the dollar's got to go down, which means Bitcoin's got to go up. I think it will start performing when they start adding more liquidity. Bitcoin will tell you exactly when they start printing a lot of money to solve for this liquidity crisis. By the way, Bitcoin going down is very simple. Someone out there needs to raise cash, whether that's to buy a house, whether that's because they got liquidated, whether that's because they need to fund the SpaceX IPO. There's investors that invest in these big AI companies and they don't have the money. Well, they're all IPOing. The wires are due. Well, I got to start selling stuff. Again, this is all a liquidity crunch. There's not enough liquidity out there. And so things like Bitcoin going down, think of it as people are raising cash. And so when people don't need to raise cash anymore and can instead save cash, that means we're going from tight liquidity to abundance in liquidity. And so I think that has to happen, or we'll go through something violently worse than the Great Depression, some severe levels of austerity. Bitcoin will win inevitably in that route too, but I just don't think politicians and central planners will let that happen. They tend to print the money. So am I bullish? Yes. Do I need Bitcoin to go up soon though? No. I think I think Bitcoin is telling us the truth. The consumer sentiment is in pain. There's not enough liquidity. Everyone's needing to raise cash, whether it's for their credit card bill, because they're late on their mortgage, because they've missed rent, or because they committed a bunch of money to an AI company and they don't have it, and it's IPOing.
The ownership and distribution of Bitcoin is one of Jack Mallers' most intriguing points. In the past, banks and governments gradually came to hold a disproportionate amount of valuable assets like gold. They were able to affect the entire monetary system once they had the majority of the gold. Bitcoin operates in a different way. Instead of being distributed to a small number of people all at once, new coins are produced through the proof-of-work mining process and released gradually over time. Ownership is now far more widely spread since anyone may purchase or mine Bitcoin. According to Mallers, this makes it considerably more difficult for any one organization or government to control Bitcoin. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and enable post notifications for future Bitcoin, macroeconomic, and digital asset content before we go any further. Now, let's get into his powerful predictions.
I think one of Satoshi Nakamoto's greatest innovations, I'll say one of the most impressive feats Satoshi ever accomplished, in my opinion, or the most underrated, is how he was able to distribute Bitcoin fairly to the people. Mind you, the United States was able to say, those IOUs are no longer backed by gold. Oh, you thought you had something in a vault? It's ours now. They were only able to say that because the level of physical concentration that the gold market had become. And mind you, this is because, Lynn Alden has a great book on this. It's because our ability to communicate outpaced our ability to physically settle value. When the telegraph was invented, I was all of a sudden able to instantly communicate with someone across the world, but I wasn't able to actually settle the physical value. So I can get on the telegraph and say, I want to send you a bar of gold, but I couldn't physically settle that value. And so what was the solution? The solution was everyone deposit your gold to the governments and to the banks, and they'll manage the IOUs and build things like SWIFT to settle. But the problem is that concentrated the physical supply of the actual asset to a point where all the governments could say, actually, let's just tell them that the gold they deposit is ours. And those fiat notes are backed by full faith and credit in the government and our military. And if you don't pay taxes, someone with a weapon on their hip will show up to your front door and put you in a box with no windows for the rest of your life. That was able to happen because the physical commodity was so concentrated in their hands. Now, what's the difference with Bitcoin? We're sitting here debating if one company that owns 4%, not 40, 4 is like existential. Everyone's freaking out. Where is Bitcoin? Where is the supply held? There is no one that owns 50, 60, 70%. You cannot corner a market. Like if a company that owns 4% or even 10% comes out and says, like, we have all the Bitcoin, it's like, we don't care about your opinion whatsoever. Where's the supply? The supply is distributed within the people. How the heck did Satoshi get away with that? Through proof of work. Somehow was able to say, because what's the fair way to distribute a brand new currency? Oh, I'll give a bunch to my family. Well, my buddies I play pickleball with should get a little bit. What's the fair way? It's hard. Well, do we give everyone an equal amount? Well, like, that's highly inflationary if you do it all at once. The fair way was proof of work. Everyone has access to energy. I'm going to create this algorithm. It's going to optimize for 10 minutes on average. And over time, that's the most fair way I can think of distributing the coins. And by the time Wall Street and everyone figured it out, the supply is gone. There's already over 20 million Bitcoin issued. It's gone. And where is it? It's with the people. So I don't think that there is a risk of, and the other thing about gold is physically holding it. Like if I want to be like, man, not your minerals, not your gold, I need to withdraw it and self-custody it. How the heck would I self-custody $10 million of gold in my house? With Bitcoin, it's free to hold, easy to hold, free to receive, free to store. I could put it in my brain, and the people have it. So I don't think it's apples to apples, that comparison. I don't buy that, these paper markets have an ability to manipulate in the same way that they would physical commodities, because all the physical commodities, it's all sitting in Fort Knox, right? Well, I think borrowing against Bitcoin, it's the most successful product I've ever launched. We have the product at Strike. We think it's the best product in the market, and it's the most successful thing we've ever launched, and it's pretty obvious as to why. You have something that's the best performing asset in human history, and it is the cornerstone of everyone's savings for our customers. I mean, every customer story of ours is the same. Sure, you start allocating 1% of your net worth to Bitcoin when you first got into it. And then somehow, some way, that's quickly become 90% of your net worth, whether your conviction grew or the price grew. If something goes up 10,000%, either you are getting like a LeBron James salary or that's going to dominate your net worth, right? And so you have wealth that you don't want to sell because it appreciates so much and there's tax consequences to selling it, but it is how you are saving. And so how do you get liquidity and how do you live your life with this newfound savings account that has changed your life without departing and paying taxes and being able to reliably, safely borrow against it? Different credit products, like we have a line of credit, which is more like a HELOC. We have fixed term loans coming out with all new products as well. So that's been massively successful. I think it will continue to be massively successful. I mean, I estimate the Bitcoin-backed lending market to be anywhere between $20 to $30 billion in size against a $1 to $2 trillion asset. It's tiny. I think that'll only grow. And it makes sense that Morgan Stanley, Bitcoin is for everyone. I find it contradictory that people are like, yeah, Bitcoin's for all, it's decentralized, it's freedom, except for Larry Fink. Screw that guy. It's like, well, who elected you the president of Bitcoin? That's kind of the whole point. Yes, it's for enemies at war to settle trade through the Strait of Hormuz. It's for your neighbor that cheers for the opposing football club. It's for everyone. That's the whole point. And so is it for BlackRock and Morgan Stanley? Yeah, it is. And if they have good products, then customers will use them. And if I have better products, customers will use mine. I don't see a problem with that. And I think that the Bitcoin-backed lending market is good. It also, by the way, it takes sellers off the market too. If you need to raise liquidity, then you don't have to sell.
One of Satoshi Nakamoto's greatest accomplishments, according to Jack Mallers, was not just establishing Bitcoin, but also figuring out how to distribute it fairly. He demonstrates how earlier forms of money, particularly gold, finally came to be centralized in the hands of banks and governments. Governments were able to alter regulations, reject the gold standard, and replace it with fiat money since so much of the world's gold was kept in centralized vaults. According to Mallers, Bitcoin was created in a different way. Through proof-of-work mining, new coins were gradually given over time, allowing anybody with access to energy and processing power to participate, as opposed to giving the supply to a select group of insiders. This resulted in a significantly more dispersed ownership structure that is much more difficult for any institution, business, or government to manage. Additionally, he contends that a lot of people are overly concerned about big businesses purchasing Bitcoin. A single company's ownership of a small portion of the entire supply is insufficient to exert influence over the network. Bitcoin is distributed among millions of people worldwide, in contrast to gold, which ended up in government vaults. Because consumers may store it themselves without depending on banks, it is also considerably simpler to own and safeguard. One of Bitcoin's greatest advantages, according to Mallers, is that it is far more impervious to manipulation than conventional assets. Mallers also explains why borrowing against Bitcoin is becoming increasingly popular. As Bitcoin has appreciated over the years, many investors now hold most of their wealth in it. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and enable post notifications for future Bitcoin, macroeconomic, and digital asset content. And as always, happy investing.